Hello, my name is Audrey Becker. I'm a sophomore at Center College, and I want to take this opportunity to talk to you about my summer research project, Reflecting on Remote Instruction, Suggestions for Elementary Education in a Global Pandemic. So, as we all know, the coronavirus pandemic has forced schools around the world to stop in-person instruction and conduct classes remotely when possible. Online classes are nothing new for high school or post-secondary students, but for elementary students, they were almost unheard of up until this point. So I wanted to see how remote instruction for elementary students could be improved. I decided to undertake a case study of the school district in which I grew up, Jefferson County Public Schools in Louisville, Kentucky. It's one of the biggest school districts in the country with almost 100,000 students. So there are many, many unique challenges that go along with that. Before the pandemic, there was very little research on online elementary education because, like I said, it wasn't very common. However, there are a couple of studies that found that elementary schoolers learning online performed worse on standardized tests when compared to their peers who attended in-person classes. In addition, before the pandemic, elementary students used less classroom technology than older students, so when the pandemic started and they had to learn remotely, they were less familiar with that technology. Another group that is less familiar with technology is low-income students of all grades. They have less access to it at home, and so they're less likely to be as proficient with computers when compared to students from middle and high-income families. Finally, a problem facing students of all grades during the pandemic is that learning remotely makes them less likely to retain what they learn because of the lack of face-to-face interaction with teachers, which is especially important for younger students, as well as just the general stresses and anxieties that go along with the pandemic. So, for my research objectives, I wanted to investigate JCPS elementary parents and teachers' experiences with the remote instruction that happened in the spring of 2020, and I wanted to use their experiences to compile a set of recommendations for how to make more remote instruction more effective and enjoyable for the elementary school community. So I interviewed 10 elementary parents and 11 teachers representing 5 schools, and I conducted these interviews over Zoom. The teachers were asked 14 questions and parents were asked 11. All the responses were anonymous and recorded on the standard interview form, and I wrote all of the questions. So I asked teachers about their teaching methods, about how long they worked, how long they expected students to work each day, about their expectations for parents during this time as well as students, and about changes that they would like to see made to remote instruction for when it happens again in the future. I also asked them about mental health because I thought that was very important and I didn't want it to go overlooked. In terms of parents, I asked them about how they helped their children during NTI, which is non-traditional instruction, which is JCPS's way of saying remote instruction. I asked them what their expectations were for teachers. I asked them about mental health as well, and about changes that they would like to see made to remote instruction for the future. So I'll go through the teacher findings first. Teachers mentioned 4 common methods of teaching during NTI. They were required to use Google Classroom, so 82% of them posted assignments there, pre-recorded lessons, or just written instructions. 63% conducted live lessons. 55% made what's called a choice board, where they posted a list of a variety of different assignments, and students had to complete a certain number of those assignments, not all, so they could choose which ones they wanted to do by the end of the week. And that allowed more flexibility for parents and teachers and students. So 55% of them did that, and then 36% used other educational software such as Flipgrid, Screencastify, just anything not Google Classroom goes in this category. But the most effective of those teaching methods was found to be live lessons, and that is a trend that we will see come up many times, so I'll talk about that later. Teachers interacted directly with students either through live lessons or individual direct messaging like text and emails, an average of 6.2 days per week. So they really had to be available almost all the time, especially with working parents. They had to be available evenings and weekends to answer questions then as well. And 73% of teachers had to cut content from their original lessons plans. Some were even told not to teach anything new during this time. Teachers expected students to work, if you include the non-core content subjects, which are the special areas of music, art, and library, teachers expected their students to work for about an hour and a half every day. Excluding the special area, teachers expected students to work for about 2 hours a day. And the reason for excluding the special area would be because students were expected to spend a lot less time on that. All of the non-core, non-essential subjects kind of fell by the wayside, especially for the students who couldn't even use computers and had to choose the paper packets that JCPS gave as an option for students without access to technology. Those packets didn't even have special area, so students couldn't even work on it then, and it just kind of fell by the wayside. So that's why it's important to look at the data with and without those subjects. However, those special area teachers still worked just as much as the regular teachers, and teachers in general worked for an average of about 6 hours a day, but with different hours such as evenings and weekends. So even though it was about the same time as a normal school day, it was different times of the day. Teachers reported anywhere between 35 and 85% of students consistently submitting work on time. And for those students that didn't submit work on time, they really just had to figure out on a case-by-case basis the best solutions. They communicated with the parents, and it was just really key for them to be flexible and allowing students to maybe do fewer assignments if they were facing extenuating circumstances. Teachers really didn't have that many expectations for parents during this time, just to communicate with the teachers and to not do their students' work for them. Teachers reported a lot of different mental health resources available. They said that the counselors had a Google Classroom page available for students. They could fill out a form if they needed to talk to a counselor. The school family resource centers were available during this time, and staff were checking in on students. And the district has always provided counseling for teachers, so that continued during the pandemic. In addition, one teacher incorporated mental health into her content, and I will talk about that later because I think it is really important. In terms of the upcoming school year, 73% of teachers are planning to adjust their standards at least somewhat. The district is really pushing for this focus on the essentials, and so just even within the core subjects, they will only teach the essential standards, at least until they can get back into the buildings in person. For teachers, the most stressful aspects of remote instruction, the things that they would want to change, would be lack of familiarity with educational technology. So a lot of teachers were just forced to all of a sudden use this technology that they didn't know how to use with very little time. And so I think that it's really important, if they haven't already been using their summer to familiarize themselves, which a lot of them have been, to just have somebody in the technology department create a tutorial for Google Classroom, and that would help students, parents, and teachers. Teachers mentioned that it was really difficult for them and for families without access to multiple devices. So especially for parents that had to work and use computers, it was tough to find time for the students to use computers, and for families with multiple students, it was tough to split that computer time, that class time between the students. And so JCPS has already committed to providing 30,000 more Chromebooks for students, and so I think that that's really great. They need to dig into their Chromebooks that are just sitting unused in schools and not limit it to one per family, because oftentimes that's not enough. Teachers also said it was really difficult to keep students engaged and accountable when they couldn't see the students in person. And I think that they've mentioned a lot of great solutions for that are planning to be implemented. Stricter attendance rules, especially since more students will be available to be at those live lessons. They weren't mandatory before, now they will be because everyone will, in theory, have computers. Teachers are planning to vary their lesson formats to keep students engaged. And it's also really difficult for teachers to give feedback when the parents are doing a lot of the work for the students. So teachers are just going to need to reiterate to parents that they're not expecting perfection. And when they do get feedback, they'll need to tell parents to be on the lookout for it because the software doesn't always show it. So feedback, another issue. Okay, moving on to parents. A lot of them had to help their students with technology. More than half. About half had to help students with assignments and establish a routine for students in terms of when they could work and when they could have free time. And a lot of them were just there to sit in the same room, provide focus, and answer questions. But despite all that, 70% of parents reported that their students struggled with motivation. And for those that didn't, it was really just about personality. Those that were naturally motivated before continued to be naturally motivated. And for those that weren't, parents had to create routines, give incentives to do work, and encourage students to go to live classes as part of that routine. Parents reported their children spending anywhere from 1 to 6 hours per day on schoolwork. We got a lot of extremes, just like we had the extremes of students who were really independent and students that needed to be handheld through everything. We got extremes of very little work to a lot of work. But the average was about 2.5 hours per day, which even if you exclude special area from the teacher's answer to this question, it's still a half an hour more. So parents reported their children spending more time on work than the teachers expected them to. As far as parents' thoughts on teachers, they were given a question, how much do you think your child learned during NTI, on a scale from a lot, some, a little, or nothing? And 70% of them said their students learned some, 30% said that they learned a little. Again, there's coming into play, some teachers were told not to teach any new content. So in that case, students would learn a little to nothing. But communication came up again. When asked what teachers did well, half of parents said that they were really good at communicating, and that was just something that was really appreciated. 40% of parents also enjoyed the live meetings. So again, like with teachers, live meetings were popular compared to the other teaching methods. They provide motivation for students. They helped create this routine if they have to be at a live meeting at a certain time. It's just good for the kids to see their friends and their teachers, especially at such a young age, to have that contact. But at the same time, the pre-recorded lessons are great because they allow for flexibility when parents are working to go back and look at them in the evening. Solution could be to have students at the live lessons, but then maybe also record them so parents can go back and look at them if they want. So parents reported the staff phone calls as the most common mental health resources. The counseling staff, and then staff like kindergarten assistants and library assistants that otherwise weren't as busy, were called upon to check in on teachers once or check in on families, actually, parents and students, once or twice every week. But what I found really interesting was that parents really had no knowledge of that counselor Google Classroom page. And I just think that the mental health resources really could have been communicated a lot better, because the fact that they had no knowledge of that and that teachers really weren't aware that their fellow staff members were calling families, it just showed that the mental health resources weren't being communicated very well, and that people maybe weren't able to take advantage of everything that they had access to. And I think that especially in such a difficult circumstance as a pandemic, that needs to change. Mental health needs to be communicated clearly and often. Everyone needs to be aware of all the resources available. Parents, like teachers, were stressed about technology issues during remote instruction, both the lack of familiarity with the technology and then just like general technical difficulties. Parents who were working had a difficult time being available for their students at home. And then it was really frustrating for both parents and teachers who were also parents to note that in families of 2 or more students, there was often one teacher giving a lot more work than the other, and that inconsistency was really frustrating. So overall, synthesizing the results from parents and teachers, what went well was the communication. The teacher office hours, especially during evenings and weekends where parents were available, were very appreciated, as were the staff check-ins to parents for mental health. A lot of parents really took advantage of that. And then on the flip side, parents communicating with teachers when maybe an assignment was too difficult or just any sort of circumstance came up, that was really, really appreciated. So it's a two-way street. Teachers need to communicate with parents. Parents need to communicate with teachers. And overall, they did a really great job of that this spring. The live meetings also went really well, and parents and teachers want to see more of those, and that will be happening in the fall. JCPS has said that. As far as areas for improvement, like I mentioned, more computers need to be given out, and they need to not just be limited to 1 per family, because there are still plenty of computers available. But in addition, we can't just give people computers and expect them to know how to use them or their software, so instructions need to be provided on that when possible. Like I mentioned, the mental health resources need to be communicated better, because the teachers weren't aware of some of the resources the parents were mentioning, and the parents weren't aware of some of the resources the teachers were mentioning. And that is really an issue. Everybody needs to have access to all the resources. In addition, mental health needs to be incorporated into content and be kid-friendly. Like I said, the 2nd grade teacher that I talked to had mental health Mondays where kids could just rant about what made them frustrated and talk about situations for calming down, and that she got really positive feedback on that from her students. Teachers need to be consistent in how much work they assign so there's not inconsistency within families, and teachers need to emphasize that they're not expecting perfection so that students can do their own work and it's easier to give feedback. But there's really no easy solution in a school district this big. I think my study, for the most part, can be generalized to other large school districts. Things like communication and technology access will be common in almost any school district that you study. There will be some things that are unique to JCPS, like the requirement of using Google Classroom, but overall, you can generalize these findings to other large public school districts. The main limitation was the small sample size. If given more time, I would like to study more parents and teachers from more schools, ask them about their experiences so that the sample could be as diverse and accurate as possible. In the long term, I would also like to study how remote instruction affects elementary schoolers, their learning, their development, and just like not being able to see their teachers in person. I want to see how that would affect them. But for now, my study and my findings have been reported. Thank you all very much for listening.